A quick favor before we start, if you love the Blueprint podcast, please rate and review us wherever you listen. It makes a huge difference. Thanks and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Blueprint podcast, where we throw out the old blueprint so you can become who you were always meant to be. I'm your host, Jason Smith, and if you haven't already, make sure you click the subscribe button and share this podcast with your friends on social media and tag me in it at JBirdFit. Today, I have a very special guest for you, Trevor Hansen. Trevor is an internationally recognized relationship coach and the founder of The Art of Healing. He went from anxious attachment, a toxic relationship, a broken jaw, and walking away from a career at Tesla to becoming one of the leading voices teaching people how to finally feel secure in love. With a master's in marriage and family therapy and training under top attachment experts, Trevor has helped thousands break the patterns that keep them stuck. He's been featured by the Gottman Institute and has spoken to crowds of over 10,000. In this episode, Trevor breaks down why insecurity is the relationship killer, how anxious attachment silently sabotages your life, and what it actually takes to build emotional confidence and choose healthier love. If you've ever chased the wrong person, lost yourself in a relationship, or felt like you're too much, this conversation is going to hit home. Trevor Hansen, welcome to the Blueprint Podcast.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
It is really good to have you. I enjoy your content. Admittedly, I don't follow it. I do follow it from the podcast Instagram. The only reason I don't is because I don't want my content to be influenced by so many other people that are talking on the subject. You'll start to notice that you'll see all the books behind me. As you delve into each of the books, you find out that so many people talk about attachment in a variety of different ways. And that includes adding in some of the subcategories. So I'm curious, when you talk about attachment, do you talk about it in the core four, or do you use all the subcategories as well?
You know, the subcategories can be helpful, but for the most part, my audience isn't therapists. It's not the people who are looking for like the deepest, craziest nuance in the world. They're usually the people who are like, listen, I'm like, got this fear of abandonment. I don't believe I'm good enough. I overprotect myself in relationships. I'm, maybe more on the anxious side. We do help some avoidance as well. And I just want
How can I manage the avoidant?
Yeah, exactly. Like, how am I gonna put him on a leash? Keep him close, turn him from a brick wall back into a boyfriend. Yeah, and it's like, I pretty much just stick to the core four because I just don't find the nuance actually helpful. It's usually just adds a layer of complexity and confusion that the average person doesn't really need.
No, I love that you say that. For me, when I look at it, there's so many different labels that we've taken on today. It's like you're in Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts and you've got all your different badges. I got my anxious attacher badge, Mom. Not recognizing that you actually don't carry these labels with you for the rest of your life, that you can earn or learn to have a secure attachment style.
If we talk about like earning or learning any attachment style, we got to realize that like we've already done it once passively. We've already learned or earned one version of an attachment style, which is, I've often called it programming, but I like the language of like earning and learning. That's fun too. So we'll stick with that today. But you learned it or earned it through emotional experiences. And I want to emphasize that again. You learned it through emotional experiences, meaning, let's take an anxious attacher. We'll give a couple of examples very briefly, but the example list can go on infinitely. You have a mom who's less emotionally available just because she's so stressed out all the time. Mom has her own anxious attachment probably. She's so stressed, she's difficult to connect with. And so even things like eye contact or noticing that mom is happy doesn't really happen a lot. And so you kind of learn that like, oh, I got to do my song and dance. I got to make mom happy in order to get attention. And so it builds in this anxiety that like, oh my gosh, like I have to earn this love. I have to do something to qualify for it. And so therefore there's like this scarcity mentality that builds in. And this is a very logical flow that I'm explaining, but it's actually an emotional process. When we think about even the way that the brain is constructed, the front part of the brain is logic, rational, it understands timelines. The back part of the brain is where like a lot of our emotion centers are. That's where your attachment style really lives. And in order to access that part of the brain, to do any kind of programming, you have to go through the door of emotion, not through the door of logic. And this is the same reason why people really get stuck in healing. Fast forward, they're trying to heal through a bunch of logical solutions. They're listening to a ton of podcasts and they're reading a bunch of books, and maybe they're even in therapy, but every week it's just talking about their week over and over again. And their therapist gives them a little pat on the emotional butt and then sends them on their way saying, like, you're good, I believe in you. But they don't really feel anything new. And then they're wondering why they're getting stuck. They're trying like everything in the world, but they're getting stuck. It's like, well, because you're not actually going through the doorway that creates a new attachment style, that created yours in the first place, which is the doorway of emotion. We have to go through the emotion door in order for this to change.
It's important to remind people that you didn't have a choice in how you responded to your caregivers in that time period of your life. So you didn't
Totally.
actively choose to have that anxious attachment style. It actually began in utero. And then, like you said, it becomes programmed into you through 0 to about 7 years old.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's huge. Is that you didn't really have a choice, right? You were exposed to circumstances that created emotions such as fear, anxiety, being unsettled, and especially when you think about this. I had a client recently, so we do this thing. We do it's like a 2-day in-person experience where you're one-on-one with me. It's only a handful of people tend to do it, but we're sitting on this beach in Hawaii because that's where I live in person, and we were talking about how he's like, man, when I don't get this text back from a girl, like I literally feel like I'm gonna die. And I was like, a very simple question. I was like, why do you think specifically that you feel like you're going to die? And he like sits with it for a minute and he goes, well, I had so much neglect growing up, and when you're a kid, you're neglected, you literally would die unless somebody like eventually comes around and helps you out. And he's like, so I think like I had programmed into me this emotion that's associated with like I feel like I'm gonna die. And it made so much sense. And he, in that moment, had so much compassion for himself. Whereas previously, when he's waiting for that text back, he thinks he's going to die. He's beating himself up, like, gosh, I'm so insecure. This is so stupid. Why do I overthink? But now he's like, oh, it makes a lot of sense, like why I feel the way I do. I had an emotional experience that was akin to almost death around connection. And so now, when there's something that feels or looks similar to my nervous system, it's going to pick up on it as a threat of nearly death. Okay, yeah, makes a lot of sense.
What is it that brings people into that level of awareness to begin to see that for themselves?
Well, I think part of it is just having somebody to like really guide you in asking the right kinds of questions. Something I realized is that I've I've done therapy. Kind of our offer is more aligned with like coaching now, but a lot of times, and there is some utility to this. It's not the black and white, and I'm not saying the one is wrong or right, but I found for the people I work with, this is more helpful than the other option, and I'll describe what these mean. So oftentimes a process of awareness and discovery can take an incredible amount of time because it's just like a lot of like open-ended questions and wandering and like, and you're 3 4 months into seeing a coach or a therapist, and you're starting to finally get the picture of why you feel the way you do, what happened in your past, all the influencing factors is what I might call them, and you're starting to get the picture. And I will say, awareness alone is just logical as well. It can be a bit emotional. Like if you leverage awareness to build in deep sense of self-compassion, that can help happen. You can see it in the story of that guy. It was starting to go that way, right? Where he's starting to get compassion. But just awareness alone doesn't change anything. That's why some of the most dysfunctional people I know are also therapists who have like PhDs and they know everything.
I'm so glad you said it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not naming anybody on
Yeah.
purpose, but it's like it exists, right? And
Well,
so
there's often a
aware,
reason why we choose the professions that we go into,
hey,
right? So it,
that's
it
fair
does
too.
make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And but that's one way of doing it. Is very like open-ended and guided. And that guidance is better than just trying to do it on your own. I will definitely say that. Whether it's a coach or a therapist or whatever, but it's the more open-ended wanderings around like, oh, asking the questions versus what we do is we just give like a list of influencing factors. It's funny, we have this like program called the Secure Self Club, and when people are in it, their goal is to become secure. And they're going through these factors. We just have like a sheet that we essentially print off, and it's all different areas like divorce and religion and sibling and your role in the family and like all of these different areas. And it's basically like, did this happen for you? Could this be an influence? Is this maybe an explanation? And they can go through it. And within like an hour, you're circling four or five of those, going like, yeah,
Well, son of a gun.
that's it right there, right? We didn't take months. We did it in a couple hours, maybe, or maybe even less, where they just have that core understanding of the why. And I think people also get in the trap of feeling like they have to know more, like they have to get more awareness of the why. And if they'll do that, then it'll finally like unlock healing. I don't find that to be true. I think you just need a basic understanding of things like what are the unmet emotional needs that I had in childhood that I'm now projecting onto others when I'm anxious in my relationships? How can I explain why I feel the way I do? You know, those are two very simple things. And then another third point of awareness is like present day awareness is what is the cycle that I get into? Can I track this negative spiral, this negative cycle, so that I can see it and get out of it? So if you can understand your current day cycle, the past influencing factors as to why you feel the way you do, and more specifically, one of those factors is what are the unmet emotional needs from the past that are now influencing that present day cycle that I'm projecting on other people? You get those answers and you're kind of off to the races. You can then go in and do the rest of the work that's really going to move the needle.
Much of this is a journey of self discovery, but it's also learning to tell yourself the truth. There's so much narrative wrapped around all of the different experiences that we've had. So we get to this place where you're trying to figure out how to know, like, and trust yourself. So you ask yourself all these questions. Who am I? Where am I going? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? And what do I want? And it becomes really overwhelming and confusing at first. But once you start to get those answers for yourself, you become more capable, competent, and confident with who you are as a person and your place in this world. And when you do that, you begin to see not only yourself a little bit differently, but all the other people in your life as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's spot on. Yeah.
Looking back, what made you realize your own patterns of integrating yourself into relationships with others, and how do you stop blaming others for the way that you feel?
Let's start with the first piece, which is why is insecurity such a relationship killer that most people don't actually point to? They'll usually point to things like, oh, conflict is it, or selfishness is it, or something along the lines of that, right? But I don't really think so. I think conflict behind it, there's insecurity. I think selfishness behind it, there's insecurity. I think cheating, I think all of the things, most of the time, there's some sort of insecurity. And if we define insecurity as kind of two parts, one, insecure within the self, meaning I'm not so sure that I have my own worth and security intact in who I am. I don't know if I'm good enough. And if you don't know you're good enough, for example, you're probably going to be more defensive. Uh, that's one tiny example of how that plays out. And then the defensiveness creates the conflict, and the conflict isn't really the issue. It's like, no, you're protecting yourself because you're insecure from a place of defensiveness. So at the root, it's the insecurity. Um, and that's one tiny example of many ways that could play out. The second one is usually related to the first, but it doesn't always have to be. The second one is I don't feel secure in others, meaning others choosing me, showing up for me. There's a fear of like abandonment, rejection, not being seen or chosen, something along those lines. And when you're in that place, you're going to be self-protective in new kinds of ways. So early relationships, and this is kind of going into my own story, I had an anxious attachment, feared that people weren't going to, these girls that I was trying to date didn't want me, even just people in general, right? Like even friendships. I always felt insecure, like in even relationships with other guys, just feeling like I wasn't quite
Like an
enough.
outsider?
Yeah, yeah, just like never quite feeling like I can fit in ways. And yeah, connected, right? And so some of the maladaptive protective mechanisms that I put in place was, I'd be overcommitting too quickly in a relationship with these girls that I was interested in. I would just show up with a lack of confidence and they could sense it. And I tell you what, nothing's a bigger turnoff than a lack of confidence. And not just because it's like, oh yeah, we just want confidence. No, no. If you look at the root, women are primarily seeking safety in relationships as the first thing. The first and ultimate thing is safety. And a guy who's not confident doesn't give them that sense of safety. Safety is like, I feel calm. I feel consistent. I feel like you're not afraid of things. If your guy, and especially I'm talking about like very traditional relationships, and so forgive me if I'm not talking about your relationship, but if a guy in a traditional relationship isn't able to fill that role, even in his energy of like, I'm a protector, I'm going to take care of everybody, and I'm not actually terribly afraid of what's going on here, and I don't want to twist this into some toxic masculinity thing where like you can't have fears. That's not what I'm saying. But if you project this sense of anxiety that shows that you're afraid of her, man, that's a big old turnoff. That's not going to be good. So, and it comes out like double texting or asking for commitment too soon or just being a little bit of a simp, all those things. That's going to be a big turnoff. And that's what happened to me. And I only say that because I experienced it, right? I'm not dogging on anybody. This was my life. And in a relationship, insecurity looks like protecting yourself with like heavy criticism of your partner, right? It's kind of like telling them how they need to love you in a forceful way, is what criticism is. It's, in rare cases, but in some cases, it's seeking attention from other people, right? I don't feel good enough. I don't feel like I can trust that you're going to choose me. And so now I'm going to seek attention from people outside of this relationship. Ooh, man, then we're just leading down that slippery slope of some sort of cheating. It just always usually seems to come back to what's the fear and the insecurity within you that's causing you to protect yourself in these ways that is destructive to a relationship. You'll almost always find it is back to some sort of insecurity.
Hey, Blueprint listeners, if today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to truly unlock your own personal transformation, I invite you to explore the Self-Discovery Blueprint. This is where we dive deep into the strategies and insights you need to understand who you are, clarify your purpose, and build the life you're truly meant for. It's the comprehensive guide to your next level growth. You can find out more by visiting my Stan store, link in bio, or in the show notes.
So for all the guys out there that are identifying with having an anxious attachment style, and I'm seeing this increase more and more just in the people that reach out to me through my own content, and I don't think you need a case study to be able to show this. You hear a lot of people talk about, again, attachment in so many different ways, but I'm seeing more and more men come in and identifying with that type of dynamic. So
Yeah.
how can we get them to that place of just saying, you know what, I don't need to feel shame over this, but I do need to do something about this.
Yeah. So it's interesting when we talk about the conversation around like shame and accountability or ownership is really where we're going, right? They're starting to realize that this is them, and if you are anxiously attached, most likely there is a shame component. You probably oftentimes have that, when you make a mistake and something doesn't go quite right, you're kind of defaulting to the I am bad. You're defining yourself as bad versus like, oh, that was like a bad choice. Like that didn't really work out and that wasn't effective. You're not typically seeing it that way. You're usually going to that shame place. But what's the antidote for that and the actual mechanism for true accountability is self-compassion. Well, let me make an analogy to make it really simple. Imagine you're riding your bike and you ride your bike through a bunch of like sharp things like nails or like tacks. You got bike tires full of that. And we know the outcome is going to be flat tires, but you immediately, like right after, ride through mud. This is a sketchy street. There's a lot of crap in the road. Apparently, there's nails and mud everywhere, but you're riding through the nails and then you ride right through the mud. And shortly thereafter, you start to notice that your tires are flat, but you can't actually see the surface of the tire because it's covered in the mud. And so you start blaming the mud for your flat tires. Oh, it must be the mud. That's the problem. But in reality, underneath the surface, there is a puncture wound. There is nails, quite literally, in your tire, but you're sitting there, you know, talking about the mud. This is what happens in our lives. When we start telling ourselves, oh, I'm an idiot. I'm the worst. I'm broken. I'm this. I'm that. I'm a loser. You just kind of lay it on. That shame is actually keeping you from the accurate data. The accurate data is understanding your own wounding, the puncture marks in your tires, right? You had a highly critical mom, puncture mark. You had, you were always told that you're the golden child and you have to try to keep up that role in order to feel like you're enough. Okay, that one, nobody really did it to you. You just You just have that role and you grew up with that expectation. You were taught in your faith setting by good meaning people trying to encourage healthy behaviors and connection with God that you have to be perfect or else God doesn't love you, kind of a thing, is like what you came out of that with. So puncture, 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 puncture. And if you do not approach it with self-compassion and understanding, wow, I get why I feel this way, then you can never remove the nails. You can never patch the tires because you are stuck on the mud. Too many people think accountability is being like, I'm a loser. I have to change this. I'm going to do it. Seems to work for David Goggins, but I think that it probably doesn't work for a lot of the rest of the planet to, call yourself names and decide that that's how you're going to change. And here's the real important tipping point is that compassion given to the self, especially given to the parts of yourself that have those puncture wounds, that experience that hurt. We might call it like the inner child. You might call it your attachment style. I don't care what you call it, but that part of you is there. Most likely, the nature of the puncture wound is you had an unmet emotional need, a need that is really comes down to the word love. Love could look like consistency. Love could look like eye contact. Love could look like letting your voice be heard. Love could look like trusting you to have your own autonomy and freedom. And in one way or another, growing up, you probably had one of those that was lacking. And so that's why you're responding with that fearful anxiety. But if you can learn to fill the need now, if you can learn to give yourself compassion, kindness, consistency, you can let your voice be heard, you can trust yourself in autonomy, then that's how you heal it. That is how you do it. So compassion is requisite for healing any kind of issues of attachment because A, you find the accurate data and you understand what you really need to work on instead of focusing on the mud. And number two, it's filling the unmet need of some sort of love that maybe wasn't quite there in a way that you needed it growing up. So compassion is requisite. It's not just like a cute, fluffy idea. It's literally the tool.
Yeah, we dive deeper into that with Annalie Howling on episode 106 for you guys that want to check that out and learn more about shame and self-compassion. I love what you're saying here because so much of it ends up, I talk a lot about turning the spotlight around and putting it back on yourself when you're in a relationship with another person who may or may not have an avoidant attachment. There's so many things that just naturally transpire in a relationship with someone who describes themselves as having an anxious attachment, and they might see some of the signs and signals coming from the other person, and that person could be secure in their attachment, but the way that you're showing up in that relationship, depending on how early you are in that relationship, they may decide that, this relationship isn't really for me in the first 2 to 4 weeks. And I think a lot of people get hung up on, what's popular on social media. So I have to label that person avoidant because, or maybe they're even a narcissist because they led me on for 4 weeks and then they didn't want to be in this relationship with me. And that's just wild. That's crazy. They told me that they wanted to be, it's been 4 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how can we help that person that's in that position right now? Because you spoke about this with yourself where it was like kind of early on, you're looking at the relationship and trying to get that level of commitment, trying to get that person to see you.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's two parts to this, and one part is going to be a tough pill to swallow. So I'll warm up to that. So the first thing is, yeah, I think as you become more secure yourself, well, at the end of the day, it's all about accountability. You have to be doing something to change. You can't just sit as a victim and say, well, every guy or every girl, every whatever, they're all avoidant, and this is just how it's going to be, and I'm just going to keep trying until I find the one. No, no, no. I want to empower you to know you have a lot more control over that pattern than you realize. What was that?
I said, it's not a prison sentence.
No, absolutely not. So for a lot of like deeper like psychological reasons and patterning, an anxiously attached person is more likely to attract an avoidantly attached person. For there's many reasons. I want to kind of slow down on that and focus on what's more important because the reasons will give you some understanding and some clarity, but it won't really help you change it. And so just know becoming more secure in yourself, meaning having your own self-worth, trusting yourself, being willing to step outside of or not step outside of, that sounds like cheating, step away from relationships when you know that you're not being served well, like all of those things, boundary setting, you're no longer people pleasing, all that good stuff, you're going to naturally start attracting the right kind of people. And it's not woo woo, it's not like this manifesting kind of thing. If you believe in that, that's cool, great. But even if you don't, it's not contingent on that.
But it's
So
recognizing that you can say, you know what, actually, this isn't for me,
yeah,
and that's okay.
that's a big part of it, right? It's just being willing to say, is like to have the self-respect and the lack of fear
Yeah.
that keeps you stuck. Because a person who is fearful is going to cling on to no matter who it is. And a person who doesn't have self-respect is going to be willing to take whatever that person's giving them. And so even if there are signs of an avoidant type of a person early on, you're probably going to be ignoring them if you're more on the anxiously attached side. So becoming secure is fundamental for that reason. I'm actually starting to do long form like YouTube soon, and I'm recording a bunch of stuff before we actually launch. And one thing we just did is, hey, here's like exact questions you need to look out for and ask and to figure out if this person's avoidant or not. So there's a good list out there. We don't have time to go into it all, but I will say there are ways to look out for an avoidant. So I'll give you one example. If there's something emotional that comes up in your life at all, even if you're watching a movie and it's pretty emotional and he's getting up off the couch and he's like making fun of it, he like goes to get a drink because he like can't handle it being emotional. Okay, yep, you probably got an avoidant on your hands. If you've got somebody who, doesn't reflect any kind of vulnerability in a conversation, right? You maybe get a little vulnerable, maybe not too bad, but you're like talking about your hopes or your dreams or things that you're afraid of or things that were difficult for you growing up, like something that's like a little bit deeper than like, how was your lunch? And he or she doesn't like get curious, lean in, want to ask more, empathize, or even offer up their own side of their own version of whatever story you're telling, then like that's probably not a good sign either, right? So there's very clear cut signs that you can look for. So A, look for some of those, but most importantly, focus on becoming secure yourself. And that's more of like weeding out the actual avoidant partners. And don't get so committed that you're trying to avoid the avoidant. If you get too committed to avoiding the avoidant, you avoid all people. And you avoid somebody who's avoidant but also functional in a relationship. My wife, for example, she's more on the avoidant side. I'm more on the anxious side. We both have our own tendencies still. Sure. Am I like this like perfect, like Jesus
I'm
of the
secure all the time. Look at me.
no, 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 I'm not. And so I will say, don't get into that trap because then you become the avoidant and
Yeah.
your companions will be cats for the rest of your life instead of somebody who wants to like be your best friend and love you. Like relationships are going to come with difficulties. You're going to have to figure it out. But I'll pause real quick here before I go into the tough pill to swallow on you might not actually be attracting avoidance. You might be creating them. But I'll pause because I feel like I've been on a rant for way too long.
No, I appreciate the rant, and we're good with that. I think it's that statement right there runs into the foundation of a lot of the content that I create. And when you get into the comment sections, I always encourage people, please read the captions because there's additional information there. And then, of course, come back not only to this episode of the podcast, but all the other ones, because there's so much valuable information there in recognizing that the way that we show up, the way that we integrate ourselves into relationships with other people, so much of it is subconscious. It's just something that's naturally happening. But when you begin to recognize that part of yourself that shows up and, you start to touch on that shame a little bit or, the feelings of anxiousness that you're experiencing, those are the signs and signals early on that, your attachment system has been activated. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's an acknowledgement that it's happening. So that's where we use the power of the pause to step back, pull back a little bit, zoom out, and begin to ask ourselves, well, what's happening right now? What's going on? What am I feeling? What am I thinking? Why do I feel this way? What's going on in my environment? What's the temperature outside? Who am I with? What words are they using? And why do I feel this way? And you can use that as a guide to journal out some of your experiences after the date, right? If this is from a dating perspective, right? Like you get home, you do an after action report on that date to give yourself a little bit of space and time and opportunity to think about what it is that you just went through with this person. And then you start to get in touch with a lot of the experiences that you've been having in the past, but also in the present moment. And you can tie these things together and get a little bit better handle over just kind of who you are and how you show up in these relationships. Again, compassionately.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. I love that. A lot of ownership there. You ready for part two, the hard pill
Yeah,
to
let's
swallow?
do it. Yeah.
Okay. Um, Too often people come to me with this story. Everyone I date is avoidant. especially, and I'm not picking on the women here, but I'm going to pick on them a little bit because I just hear it from them more. Um, and I only pick on people that I really hope to help because that's the best version of picking on somebody is like real loving accountability to help them change their lives. And so that's the energy that I go into this with, and knowing I was also this person.
Yeah, it's
So
always, can I reflect this back to you? Can I reflect something to
yeah,
you?
yeah. So and if I were to say this on Instagram, I'm sure the digital pitchforks and torches would come out in my comment section. And I plan to talk more about this actually there. But it's that the story goes, I'm dating and everyone is avoidant. They're all avoidant. They all suck. They all don't show up for me. They all this, they all that. And I'm like going, really? Like that just statistically, if we look at like the population, that doesn't make sense. So there's two things. We already covered the first one. You might be attracting them and you want to be aware of that. Why are you attracting them? How is that happening? What signs to look for? Sure. We got that covered. But you might not actually be attracting people who are avoidant. You might be in your own anxious attachment spiral, triggering avoidant like behavior in other people. Essentially, you're creating the avoidance. You're not experiencing it as a victim. So for example,
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
yeah, it is self-fulfilling prophecy. So let's say you're dating somebody or you're early in a relationship and met her a few times. And this person that you're interested in might have some avoidant tendencies. Sure, maybe, maybe not. It really doesn't matter. But you and your anxious attachment, you're overthinking everything. You're showing up to that date with that anxious energy. You're overdoing it. You're people pleasing. You're not really feeling like authentic, and it's off-putting for them, and so they feel less committed. Maybe they feel committed enough because you're interesting that they're going to keep going on some dates with you and they're going to see how it goes. Or in the beginning it's really fun, it's really attractive, like you're making them feel very special because you're kind of overdoing it. But as you overdo it and then they're not quite showing up and giving you maybe the level that you think you're doing because you're overextending yourself, maybe you get critical of your partner. You're really always coming down hard on it, like, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you show up for me this way? And why didn't and like anybody who's getting berated like that is probably going to either want to get defensive or pull back. Or maybe you're just putting a lot of pressure on the relationship for commitment earlier than is justified. And they're like, whoa, this is kind of a lot. Like, I'm going to pull back. I know I totally did this, right? Like, I know I was coming with some anxious pressure to try and get it's hard to say this, but like I think if I really look at it, I think at times I was trying to manipulate women into getting a second date with me or a third or a fourth. And I would never think of it that way because I'm a good person who believes in people's autonomy. But I think my own anxiety pushed me to do things like, make up excuses to see them or, pop by the place where they work so I can just say hi and like be on their mind again. Just like the things that were pressure inducing, anxiety inducing, didn't allow a relationship to progress naturally. I know I was doing that. And anyone is going to feel overwhelmed. They're going to feel pressure. They're going to feel anxious. They're going to pull back if that's what's happening in a relationship. And so your behavior might actually be contributing to either heightening their predisposed anxious or avoidant tendencies that they could already have built into them that would have lied dormant if maybe you weren't so dang critical of them or you didn't put so much pressure on them. It could have lied dormant, or you're creating what looks like avoidance in somebody who's actually secure.
But Trevor, it sounds like you're making a lot of excuses for the avoidant attacher.
Uh, yes, it is, right?
It
Yeah,
is.
avoidants are perfect. They never do anything wrong. No, of course not. The reason I'm not focusing on so much of like what they need to do, because there's obviously a story, this is the other side of the story,
Yeah.
is because I'm imagining that we're talking right now to the person who has the anxious attachment. And I want to give you, the person who's listening, who has the anxious attachment, as much power to change your life as I possibly can. Because too often the anxiously attached is stuck trying to control the outcomes of their life, but they don't actually have the power to influence the outcomes of their life. And they create more
So they
pain.
think.
Yeah. 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 Or they're not yet willing to acknowledge it. And so that's why I'm not necessarily focusing too hard on the avoidant right now.
But for the people that are listening, they are going
Mhm.
to lean more anxiously attached. And right now, at this point, they're probably feeling like, why am I always the one to blame for this?
Yeah. We need to shift even just the words we use.
Yeah.
I'm not here blaming anyone. There's a difference between, could you imagine if you hire somebody like, I have like a business coaching retainer thing that I pay for. If I went to him and every time he told me, give me clarity on what I need to change, if I felt like, oh, I'm to blame for all these problems, if that's how I saw it or I met that advice, that would be horrible. A, it would just be a very taxing experience to get any coaching. And then B, I probably wouldn't implement it very well because I would have to clean up my own like self as I'm in a puddle of shame before I'd actually be able to implement anything. And so if somebody's listening to this, be like, no, 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 no. Like you're not to blame. Like you have the opportunity to change your life. You have control. You have the opportunity to take ownership where you can. Is there a huge big old side of this story where and here's the thing, let me reframe this too. When you have done what you can, then A, you're probably going to weed out a lot of the avoidance and you're holding them accountable, right? Early stages of relationship. If you can't show up for me in the way that I need, then yeah, your responsibility is showing up for me in this way that I expect. But if you can't, then it becomes my responsibility to set a boundary and move forward. It's not a blame thing. It's just order of operations, right? It's like, that's not working. I need to set a boundary. It's still not working. Okay, see ya. I'm out of the relationship or I'm moving on or I'm making some sort of change or I'm holding that boundary. No one's like to blame there. You're just making the right decisions or the right pivot points in a relationship. If you continue to take, a relationship where you get nothing and you are miserable, then yeah, they're to blame because they're not giving you anything, but you're also to blame because you're willing to like stick with it. There's two sources of input. So I'd say like remove blame or like who it's on, just focus on what you can do. That's what I've noticed is the people that are the most miserable are the people who complain the most.
Yeah.
I was a funny story. Literally yesterday, I was getting in my car and there was this dude in this truck, kind of this like beat up truck. He's on the phone. He's kind of like an older gentleman. And he's this guy who probably is to the age where most people would have like retired in life, but he hasn't. You can tell he's working hard. And I'm not going to sit here and victim blame because I don't know his whole story. But one thing that I did see in him, he was on the phone and it was all about like, well, they didn't do this for me, and well, they didn't pull through, and they didn't, and he's just like, whoever he was talking to, there was so much just like victimizing of himself. And I'm seeing this dude, in this scenario where I'm like, I do not want to be there when I'm that old. Not that life is all about like money and everything else, but like he just seemed miserable. He didn't seem well put together. A lot of the picture there was this is a guy who is just really struggling throughout probably his entire life. And one of the factors, I'm not going to judge him. This isn't about judging. It's about just looking at what are the inputs that lead to negative outputs, or what are the good inputs that lead to positive outputs. And what are the negative inputs that might be affecting why he is where he is just being the victim, being the loudest guy in the room that's always mad and thinking that somebody else is to blame. It's like, gosh, that's just not a fun way to live. I don't like doing that.
No. It's miserable, and you end up alienating all the people that are close to you. You push them away because eventually they're not going to tolerate that type of behavior. And it goes back to what you were saying a few minutes ago with your ability to set boundaries, not only with other people, but primarily with yourself. So I was hoping you could talk to us a little bit more about how we can begin to set those boundaries.
Yeah. Well, I think almost all boundaries are actually a boundary with yourself and some of them have an external application. Not all boundaries have an external application, but I will say probably all boundaries are ones that you set with yourself, meaning you set the limits. For example, I don't continue in relationships where I'm not getting consistent communication back. I don't let myself do that. And that's the key. I don't let myself do that. It's you have to give me consistent communication or else you're out. That's not a boundary. That's a demand. That's an ultimatum. There's a very big difference. So it's really just committing to taking care of yourself in a way that reinforces the belief that you're worth taking care of. And sometimes you communicate it outwardly, sometimes you don't. Like, for example, early in relationships, like in dating, you're not really setting a whole lot of boundaries on date one, two, maybe even three, because you're not even in a relationship yet. Like, you're not going to communicate.
But some of them are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of them are.
Yeah. Well, and that's the part.
It's so funny. I'm gonna tell a
Yeah.
quick
Yeah.
story
Tell me.
because they swipe right and it's like, oh, yeah, super cute, adorable, handsome, beautiful, whatever, right? Guys and gals. And so they do that. And then they're like, I actually have enough information here. I can go to Google. And so they Google them. And then they find their LinkedIn. And then they find their social media. And now they've painted a narrative and a story about this person. You know, I've seen their Facebook photos from 10 years ago. So they've seen exes and all these experiences and vacations and all these other things. And they've got this wonderful story that's building up in the background, in the back of their head of this person before they even meet them or even start communicating with them. So they'll have some messaging on the apps. And this is one of the biggest things that I hear is that, well, we've talked for 2 weeks and no date has been set up. And it's like, boundary time, right? This is a great opportunity for you to say, you know what, if somebody doesn't set a date within a 2-week period of starting to talk with me, then I'm going to put a pin in that, or I'm going to cast it aside and just kind of leave it in my file folder over there. And if they happen to want to set a date and I'm available and I feel like doing that later on, sure. Or you just say, you know what, I want somebody who's going to be more consistent, somebody who's actually going to show up and want to communicate and want to set the date, because that's where I'm at in my life. So it's like it starts touching into your value system and all these things that we should know. You know, what do you want? Again, what do you want from a relationship? And are you living that intention for what you actually want?
Yeah, beautiful example. And you just gave an example of an internal boundary that doesn't have an external communication factor to it. It's just on you.
And
And
how
you just,
empowering is that?
oh man, it's just so awesome. And here's the thing is that every time you make those choices, you reinforce the belief that you're good enough and that you're worth respecting. So if you have an anxious attachment style, most likely you struggle a bit in that department. And but you do that and you're like teaching your subconscious like, hey, I actually believe that you're worth like taking care of. I believe that you're worth this type of person. I had a funny example I shared on my stories, months ago, and people went crazy about it because I was on a podcast, and there was all these technical issues like getting it set up, and I knew that they'd probably want to go over because it was all the technical issues and they want to get their time with me, whatever. And I told them, hey, just so you know, I have got a firm cutoff on the hour. And they were like, okay, great. And what I didn't
Yeah, yeah,
tell them,
sure.
yeah, yeah, they were like, I mean, they were cool about it. They understood and they ended right on time. But what they didn't know was that firm cutoff, it wasn't another meeting. It wasn't something like terribly important, as you might call it. It was literally, I wanted to go to my favorite fish and chip spot by my house, and I wanted to go jump in the ocean for a little swim midday, take a break, and get back to things. I literally was doing something for myself, and I wasn't about to cancel plans on me. I know it's hurtful when people cancel plans on me, and I'm not willing to do it to myself because it sends me the message that, yeah, Trevor, even you don't believe that you're good enough. It's like, no way, we're not doing that.
How easy would that have been to have that internal dialogue with yourself and say, you know what? I understand what they're going through. I've seen these challenges before. I've had them for myself. And, you always want to try to reclaim that time. And
Yeah,
you just say, you know what? It's just one time. It's not a big deal. And
yeah,
then, it happens again in different places, in different spaces. And then you find yourself, it becomes part of the habit of being you that you're constantly negotiating with yourself and negotiating yourself out of some of the things that really build you up and keep you in that state of wholeness, right? That
yeah,
keep you being more of yourself.
yeah, absolutely.
When we talk about consistent communication, I know this is a big one for everybody, but texting and relationships.
Yeah.
I'm a proponent for, can we just go back to the 90s and pretend that texting is not a mode of communication except for small statements throughout the day. Hey, I miss you, pick up some milk, let's get together on this date. So you're setting appointments and you're using it for smaller types of communication versus a play by play of your entire day. And I'll let you take it from there.
I agree. Amen. I think that's important. Yeah, it's just especially for people. Okay, this is a really interesting intersection. And I know it sounds like I'm picking on women and I'm picking on anxious today, but that's just who I work with, so I can't help but think of them. But there are a lot of women who are like, I want a high value man. If you look at the data, like there's 20% of men um, are like, what was it? Like 80% of women go after 20% of the men. Now, there's like this like so small set, and it's because it's hard to find a guy who has his life together. Like he's like well, it's not hard to find him. It's just it's difficult to be that guy. You got like your crap together. You're doing things. You're succeeding. You're moving forward in a way that provides a sense of stability and safety for a partner. That's a challenging thing to do. The thing that a lot of those guys have in common is that they don't really have a lot of downtime to like type out big old long huge text messages conversations. They would much rather just experience you in person. You're better in person anyway. We get to see your smile and your face and your eyes, and you're amazing and you're so freaking hot and I love you and I want to talk to you. Like that's the coolest thing ever, is talking with you in person. And so it's not even like about, for me it's just like efficiency. Like me and my wife, we don't just like chat over text. Like that like never happens. Every once in a while I'll send her like a nice little message, something flirty or, something like that. But usually it's just like logistics. Did you check this? Did you get this? Where's that? And what are you doing for lunch? Can I eat with you? Like, that like this stuff. And so I totally agree. I think, there's so much nuance that's lost in text messages that, yeah, big old conversations, just have them in person.
Well, it's so interesting because there's a level of addiction that goes along with it. There's a group of young people that have only ever grown up with being able to communicate via a device. And so you'll find that a lot of people say, well, I communicate far better via texting than I do actually in person. And so now this becomes a skill set issue, but also, nervous system being dysregulated and not being able to have the types of conversations in person that you would like to have, and then create the connection that you truly desire with other people. And when you get that play by play all day long, you're not allowing yourself the time and opportunity to actually miss the person that you say that you're in love with, that I want to be in this relationship with. And it gives you the time to sit back and say, well, we just had this conversation and now you're going to digest that for a little bit, see what that means to you, and try to understand some of that. And you might have some follow-up questions down the road when you see them 12 hours later. But so much of this really comes down to being able to cultivate that interdependent relationship, recognizing that you can both go out into the world, you can live your lives, you can do it separately, you can go to work, you can do all the things. Nothing nefarious is going to happen because you know, like, and trust each other. And then 12 hours later, you come back and you talk about your day. And guess what? You actually have things to talk about.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, it's funny. I've never dive so deep into this, but from so many standpoints, I think limiting texting throughout the day is actually so much better for the reasons you're talking about. A, you've got things to talk about. B, if you're either of you are working, you're going to be much more locked in and better at your job if you're not just like texting throughout the day, right? The classic complaint of a boss is like they sit around and they text. It's like no, like if you want to succeed in life, if you want to make something happen, like get locked in. Lock in on what you need to lock in for. And if you want to have this mindset, I love this mindset, is I'm going to work, but really we're going to work. Like it's like you're supporting me. I'm doing this for the family. I'm doing this for us. Like we're going to make an impact in the world. You're going to go make an impact over here and you're going to come back and tell me how we did that. And I'm going to go make an impact and I'm going to tell you how we did that. It's funny, from the beginning, I've always talked about like my world, my business, all the things that I do from the standpoint of we, and the we has been me and my wife. Does she see my clients? No. Does she show up in my content? Yes. She's probably the best part of my content, if I'm being honest. But is there actually a lot of we as far as her touching aspects of my work? No, really, there's not. But she impacts my capacity to do the work and my life and like all of it. She's a huge part of it. And so I always talk about it in the we. It's like, yeah, we are going to do this, and then we are going to debrief after and see how life went today. What an exciting way of seeing life. You're not, yes, you're doing things separately and independently, but it's a common shared mission. There's a line of connection even in the physical separation.
I love that you just said that. So having a shared mission vision, I think, is one of the keys. early on in your relationship, once you get past the beginning stages within that first year and you're starting to shift into a different stage of the relationship, and you begin to recognize that, oh, okay, this is going to be a relationship for a while, so we probably need to have a shared mission and vision. Where are we going? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What is the purpose of this? What's the intent? Are we dating to date? Are we dating to have fun? Are we dating to just live together? Are we dating to get married? Do we want to have a family? And you find yourself more in this place of being willing to have those types of conversations. And it becomes that we experience that, yeah, we are going to this place. We have a target in the future that we're going to try and reach, but every now and again we're going to come back together and discuss how close are we to that target. Has that target actually changed? Do we need to start looking at something different? And now you're actually building something together, as opposed to in the very beginning you're just kind of meandering throughout time and space, like, I don't know what's happening, I guess we'll see what happens, just take it as it goes. And then you end up disappointed, frustrated, irritated, sad, lonely, depressed, angry, resentful, and filled with contempt. So what choice would you rather make? Shared mission and vision sounds pretty darn good.
Sounds great to me.
Trevor, I can't thank you enough for being here today and sharing your time with us. Tell everybody how to reach you, work with you.
I am going to be starting some YouTube content. The main place that people find me is usually Instagram. The Art of Healing by Trevor is my handle. I know it's way too long. Picked it forever ago, but that's what it is. The Art of Healing by Trevor. Go find it. There, honestly, if you're like, hey, this was cool, I want to learn more from this guy, sure, like you can join in my programs and everything else, but I would say do what's free first, right? Go from free to free. Today you paid me with your attention. Next you'll pay me with just your email address so I can give you something. So I'll give you, there's trainings on becoming secure and setting boundaries and a lot of things we're talking about today on that Instagram page. So go follow that and check out those resources.
Yeah, and those resources are really great. I got the free PDF for myself as well, and I started reading through it. So definitely take the time, give him your email address. You're not going to be disappointed in that. And Trevor, we'll do this again soon. Thank you, man.
Okay, thank you.